It's time for the All-Star edition of Phillies Talk.
The 1982 All-Star Game. You'll see the best and the brightest as the American League takes on the National League at Olympic Stadium in Montreal. On this date in All-Star history, 39 years ago today, Shive Park was the scene of the first All-Star game to be played at night. Bobby Doerr's homer won it for the American League. 22 years ago today, Willie Mays returned to New York for the first time since the Giants moved west and homered off Whitey Ford. And 11 years ago today, Reggie Jackson hit a towering drive into the Tiger Stadium lights in the last game won by the American League.
What memories, and tonight another page will be added to the All-Star scrapbook. Up in the booth, Vin and Joe are tuning up. They'll be set to call it for you. When we return, we'll have the introduction of the lineups. The 50th anniversary All-Star Game is moments away, but first, let's go to New York and NBC News.
Buddy, and welcome to the All-Star Game. I'm Bob Costas, joined in a bit by Bob Uecker and Joe Morgan. In a year that's taking on historic dimensions in terms of home runs and run production, most of the game's greatest hitters are here, but a few are not. Scratched from the starting lineup, replaced by Mo Vaughn of the Red Sox for the American League. So add Thomas now to the names of elected starters: Ken Griffey of the Mariners, Tony Gwynn of the Padres, and Matt Williams of the Giants. All of them will not be able to play in this All-Star Game. We'll talk more about that, and we'll also get to the pitching pairing in just a bit. But first, the pregame show. And for that, down to the field, and Hannah Storm. Hannah.
Thanks, Bob. Well, the last time the Phillies hosted an All-Star Game was back in 1976, and it was that year that a small 7-year-old Philadelphia boy attended his first baseball game. He sat in the stands here, and he dreamed of someday becoming a major leaguer. Well, tonight he returns as the leading vote-getter in the National League, and we will talk with Dodgers All-Star Mike Piazza when we return.
And hello, everyone, and welcome to this edition of Phillies Talk Podcast. Well, you have to go back to 1996, as we just heard there, to hear the last calls of the All-Star Game as it happened in Philadelphia. Mike Piazza and a whole lot of other great All-Stars gathered there in this great city of Philadelphia at Veterans Stadium for what would have been the final All-Star Game for Vet Stadium, 1996. Of course, before that, it was held there in 1976 for the bicentennial. Welcome to this special podcast, the Phillies at the All-Star Break 2017. And I'm going to be joined in a few minutes by a great Phillies fan, a good writer, all about the Phillies. Mr. Matt Veasey is coming on the show. We're going to talk all about Phillies at the All-Star Break, how they're doing, what we think should happen with this team, a few call-ups maybe, and maybe even a trade or two. We'll be talking about that as well. So Matt Veasey coming on in just a minute. But the Phillies ended up the first half, the unofficial first half of the season for 2017 on a positive note today, winning against the San Diego Padres 7-1. And it was the first time in many years that the Phillies had hit 6 home runs in one game. That's an incredible amount of offensive power there that they showed going into the All-Star break here in 2017. You have to go back to, I think it was 2004, to find the last time that the Phillies were able to smack 6 home runs out of the ballpark. And Nick Williams had his first home run today amongst those barrage of home runs. And Freddie Galvis had 2 for the Phillies on this day. So maybe a lot of that talk from Matt Klentak sunk into these players that nobody on this team is untouchable from either a trade perspective or even an outright release. So a lot of these players today played like they want to stay in Major League Baseball. They want to be on the field for the Phillies, and you can see the result. They had a win going into the All-Star break. That's the good news. Now, the bad news looking over the Phillies' record is that was only their 29th win of the season so far. And the Phillies have been on the losing end 58 times. So Phillies have doubled their losses so far this year. Jared Eichhoff came back onto the field off of the DL, took the mound today for the Phillies, earned his first win of the season, had a great outing. He's 1-7 now on the year. Hopefully he can turn this around with further starts throughout the rest of the summer and into September here for the Phillies, as the unofficial second half will start off in, wow, it seems like a long way away. Friday night, this coming Friday night, teams have a nice 5-day off spell coming up. And on the broadcast today, we're going to talk a little bit later in the program, some great comments from Tom McCarthy, the Phillies broadcaster, about that. What do players do on an all-star break? So I'm going to talk a little bit about that as well. Well, Aaron Nola, not sure if he's even going to be a part of the Phillies towards the end of the month with the trade deadline coming up. Of course, Matt Klentak laying down the line with all of these players and saying absolutely no one is untouchable on this team. And if you ask me, I think he should be included in that as well, because he really hasn't done a great job with this team. He's made some errors in signing Odubel Herrera, in re-signing Pete Mackanin, I believe. That wasn't necessary. If anything, he should have did that at this stage in the season and not where they were a couple of weeks into the season, and it looked so great and so rosy back then. But things have changed in a dramatic way, and it's kind of made him look bad. Matt Klentak, you have a guy that's supposed to be Stanford educated. He's hired a few ex-Google employees to run the analytics department, had a nice different department built for them in the ballpark here at Citizens Bank Park. And, what has this done? You got all these guys with these brains, so to speak, running this analytics group, and you've got nothing but nothing going on over there. I think some 14-year-old, 15-year-old kids could have done a better job than these guys that are probably getting paid big money to crunch these numbers and this new sabermetrics type of operation that they seem to be pushing out of the upper management of the Phillies at this time. Well, let's not harp on that too much. We're at the All-Star break, trying to stay positive here. And let's take a little break in the program, and on the other side of this break, we'll welcome aboard Matt Veasey onto the program.
Sponsor an ad on the Phillies Talk Podcast. Support our show and let people know about your business. Email us today. Follow us on Twitter at Fightin' Phillies or on our website, fightinphillies.com.
Hi, this is Farley.
And Mark from Baseball PhD.
Thanks for listening to BaseballPodcast.net.
Up next, another great episode of Phillies Talk.
Hi, this is Gary Matthews. You're listening to Fightin' Phillies Talk Podcast.
Brewtown Sports is your source for Brewers news and notes. Join Mr. Brewtown as he keeps you up to date on all the happenings of your Milwaukee Brewers and Major League Baseball. Follow the show on Facebook and Twitter, Brewtown Sports. Listen 24/7 at brewtownsports.podomatic.com.
Hi, this is Gary Mack of Mets Musing, and you're listening to my good friend Rich Baxter on Phillies Talk, right here on BaseballTalkRadio.com, the home of great baseball talk shows.
And I'd like to give a big Phillies Talk welcome to Matt Veasey from mattveasey.com. How you doing, Matt?
Good, Rich. How you doing this afternoon?
Not bad at all. And our Phillies led us into the All-Star break today, and we got a nice surprise out of them today.
How about that? 6 home runs. Who are those guys?
Yeah, another side to them showed today.
Well, you know what? It's 162 games, Rich, so lots of stuff happens over 162.
Yeah, 6 home runs. I think it was the first time since 2004 that the Phillies have hit 6 home runs in one game. And it just was a great thing to see. I guess a lot of the Phillies thought that if you won an All-Star game, you've come to the right place, because we're going to show you one this afternoon. So at least they treated the fans to a nice send-off into the All-Star break here. And it's going to be great to see the All-Star game, but we know what that means. And couple months from now, we're going to have no baseball, so we've got to soak it in and enjoy this.
There's a long way to go, Rich. Get your head ahead of yourself. We just started summer. We got the dog days ahead of us. We still got like you said, the All-Star game. Then we'll be worrying about the trade deadline. And for me, like after that, August is really those dog days. And then we get into the stretch run there in September with all the playoffs. And even though the Phillies won't be involved, should be some interesting stuff. And we'll see some of these kids get called up in September in all likelihood. And around baseball, I know you're a baseball fan as much as I am. There's still plenty to watch in September and October. So lots to keep us busy for a while.
Yeah, that's for sure. It just seems like the season just started, though, for me. And then you blink and turn around, and now we're at the All-Star break. It's July 9th, 2017 as we're doing this. And they had a nice interview. I don't know if you caught the game on television this afternoon, but they had a nice interview with Mike Schmidt and Ben Davis. And Tom McCarthy was asking him, what did you guys do on certain All-Star breaks? How did you spend your time? And I think Schmidt was talking about coming down to the shore one time. He did a round of golf and stayed down at Seaview Country Club, which is in Galloway, New Jersey. And Ben Davis was talking about, a trip to Florida and all. So it kind of puts a perspective on the baseball world. You wonder where an Odubel will go this year, or Freddie Galvis. Where will they end up for their All-Star break?
Yeah, Schmidt didn't get too many All-Star breaks, He only had like 4 All-Star breaks. I think out of 18 years he was on, he was like 14-time All-Star. So I think early in his career he might have missed an All-Star game, and late in his career he probably missed a couple. In fact, I know he even got elected I think he was elected as the starting third baseman the year that he hung it up. I think they actually tried to talk him into playing because he retired like right at the end of May.
Uh-huh.
And he still won the All-Star balloting for third base. So there was some talk about him coming back for the All-Star game, which he didn't do, I believe. I think he may have shown up, but he didn't play. But he made that All-Star team. It's on his record as him that was his 14th All-Star official election or appearance, whatever you want to call it. So Mike didn't get too many breaks.
Yeah. It seemed like he was trying to hunt for years that he wasn't playing on the All-Star field in the All-Star game. But it was great to hear those stories. Of course, the last starter for the Phillies was in 2014. Chase Utley got the start at second base for the Phillies in the All-Star game. And before that, you had to go back to 2011 with Roy Halladay. And then before him, 2010, Ryan Howard. So Phillies this year sending Pat Neshek to the game. And I just can't get into Pat Neshek being a Philly going to the All-Star game. How about you?
Pat Neshek as a Philly is the thing. I mean, I think as the All-Star, that's we all knew it was only going to be one Philly going this year. Mm-hmm. So it's a question of who that was going to be, and that it's Neshek, I think is just it kind of tells you a little bit about this year's team. It's a sad story, but I actually wrote about Neshek's All-Star appearance today for an article that published at Fansided and on my website. The title of the article being "It's a Great Time to Be Pat Neshek," and it is. If you think about Neshek's year, he's had a hell of a year. I mean, if you look back to the trade, he got traded to the Phillies in November from Houston, and he had to think, geez, I'm going from a young, up-and-coming contender to bottom feeder, rebuilding team. Almost had to think for a real competitive guy. I mean, he was in the All-Star game previously just a couple of years ago, and he's played for some good teams recently. Had to think it might be a little bit of a downer for him. But this year's turned out great. I mean, he was a big key in the Team USA winning the World Baseball Classic. Had a perfect appearance for them over five appearances. And then he rolls out of that, helping them, win the World WBC for the first time in history. Rolls out of that into the Phillies losing situation, but has himself an all-star first half that is going to, in all likelihood, lead to him sometime in the next 3 or 4 weeks landing with a contender again. So it's a good time to be Pat Neshek.
Yes, it is. Of course, this is his second All-Star appearance. His first came with the St. Louis Cardinals back in 2014. And Neshek's had a strange career. He really hasn't settled in anywhere. He's 36 years old. He's going to be 37 in the off season. So, yeah, he could be possibly looking at maybe one more contract coming down the pike for him. And it'll be interesting to see what team ends up with him. Of course, if you're in the Philadelphia area, you're surrounded by the Philadelphia media. You just are inundated with the fact that, all these clubs are lining up to sign him. He's the number one guy that they want to get off of this team, and he's a sought-after commodity. As you said, he's a good middle reliever. Some claim he should be a closer. A lot of fans, I was reading some tweets today, said, Neshek should be the closer on this team. What do you think about that?
He's not a classic closer in that he's not the guy, like, he's not a Jansen, or he's not even, frankly, he's not even like a Hector Neris type. I mean, he's not the type that's going to come in and at his best. I'm talking about Hector Neris. He's not the type, I almost equated Kenley Jansen with Hector Neris there. But I think people know what I'm talking about. He's not the blow him away, type fireball flamethrower that we think about as a closer when we think about a guy coming in and nailing it down at the end. I think he's more built for that key setup man role, the seventh, eighth inning role, even the eighth, big, that big one batter, two batters, that you need when right-handers come up. But that's on a contender. For this Phillies team, they really need. You see all these one-run losses that they're getting late. It's probably not it wouldn't be a bad idea to try. I mean, Neshek is, as you said, you wonder why has he bounced around. I mean, I've been saying it all year with Ben Lively, waiting 2 months plus for him to get his chance. All Ben Lively has ever done is win. All he's ever done is produce everywhere he's pitched through the minors and up. But scouts said, he's not that, he doesn't have the stuff, or, his pitches aren't all there. Well, something's there because all he does is win, and his numbers are good. Neshek's the same way. If you look at his record, you're like, all this guy does is pitch well. But nobody wants to keep him. I mean, he's on like 7 teams. And I've never heard anything about him being a problem child. He's a family guy. I mean, you almost wonder what teams are looking for sometimes, and why they're willing to spend their money in one way and not in another way. I mean, Neshek's the kind of guy you think could have really been a key part of a contender's mix for a 5 or 6 year stretch.
Yeah, I wonder if the Houston Astros wish they still had him on the club. Of course, his interpretation was that they dumped salary, and he was part of that salary dump, and that's sort of how the Phillies ended up with him. But now it seems like
you not want to pay, and that is. I mean, they were saying $6.5 million he was due on the option for his contract, but $6.5 million for a team that Houston could use him right now. I mean, they're winning, but anybody could use what he's doing. How about Washington? Washington, you'd think they would die to have a guy like Pat Neshek right now.
Yeah, he's definitely one of the guys that you can count on, it seems like. The Royals, Red Sox, and Yankees are among the 3 teams that ESPN had an article on that are reportedly in line for Neshek's services. And it'll be interesting if the Phillies do move him. Who will they get in return for him? I hope Matt Klentak has a good idea not to just hand him away, because a lot of the times Ruben Amaro seemed to do that with the Phillies. It seems like he would send different players to different teams as a gift, sort of, and the Phillies would hardly get anything back in return for it.
Yeah, it's the teams that you mentioned. You got to think about Houston, maybe wanting to get them back. You got to think about Texas, who has, if you really take a look at the wild card standings, they've gotten themselves back into the mix, and of course Washington in the National League. So there's a number of teams. Any contender could use a Neshek. So they'll have opportunities, you would think. And so it's hard to say the price that they'll get, because bottom line, you're talking about a 36-year-old. Really, he's going to be 37 in early September. So those things, at a certain point, those things matter. But if you're trying to win right now, and you're only going to be on the hook for $2 million, maybe $1 million, $1.5 million of left of his salary at that point, it's a pretty good roll of the dice if you're not paying a premium price. So that price is going to be the key. You would think that the Phillies, as good as he's been, that he's going to be inexpensive salary-wise to the other team. You would think that they'd be able to get a decent price, but it's going to be interesting to see what Klentak does here, and if he can pick up anything for any of these guys at the trade deadline that matters. It's going to matter in the long run.
Yes, it will. And, of course, Neshek, getting back to his All-Star appearance, he's got a mission to undertake. It's been reported in the last couple games. He's a big fan of the game. Even if he wasn't going to the All-Star game, he usually attends the All-Star Fan Fests, and he hunts down autographs, and he's really a big fan of the game. But on this All-Star game, it was reported that he's actually seeking Zach Greinke's autograph as one of the main players he's gone after to complete a collection that he has. I wonder if he'll be able to get Zach Greinke to sign that card for him.
Oh, Greinke's going to be in the same locker room with him, same field, same side of the field. So I can't see why it would be a difficult thing at all. As long as he's willing to, and Neshek looks like he's the outgoing type. So I can imagine, Greinke is notoriously, not that way. So hopefully, I can't imagine. It sounds like it's going to be an easy get to me.
A couple teams that are in the hunt we didn't expect to be in the hunt at the All-Star break. The Twins are still hanging in there. The Braves have picked up some steam, although they're still 9.5 games back, but they seem like they've righted themselves a little bit. The Diamondbacks certainly are a great club that's 6.5 games back of the Dodgers, so there's a lot of teams that would be out there would probably like Neshek. And another guy mentioned at the trade deadline is Tommy Joseph. And, Rhys Hoskins is playing in the All-Star Futures game going on right now, I believe, down in Miami. But Tommy Joseph has sort of proven himself in the big leagues. Do you really go and get rid of a Tommy Joseph just because it's at the trade deadline now and you got Rhys Hoskins in the background?
Sure. For me, sure. Tommy Joseph doesn't, no disrespect to Tommy Joseph, but he doesn't, I don't not deal Tommy Joseph because he's bopped a bunch of home runs. I think that Joseph has a chance to be, he already is, 25-plus home run guy in the big leagues. He's proven he is. He can help somebody, but he's at 255. He's hitting 255 right now, and he's not. I don't think he's a 40 home run hitter. So I think what you're doing is you're looking at a guy whose top end is probably as a 250, 255 hitter, who hits maybe 25 homers and knocks in, maybe 30 homers, and knocks in maybe 90 RBIs with a certain decent level of defense, but not great. His on base percentage is just a tick above 300. And the argument for I understand the argument from other people would be, well, you don't know if you'll get anything from Rhys Hoskins. Well, no, you don't know anything, but you didn't know that from Joseph either, but everybody wanted him up here when he started bashing. So I'm confident in what I see from Rhys Hoskins when I see the pieces of Iron Pigs games on television, when I read about them, when I hear what scouts are saying, when I see what the evaluators say about him, when I see interviews with him. I'm confident in Rhys Hoskins. And he's almost 2 years, a year and a half, 2 years younger than Tommy Joseph. So if Tommy Joseph can help a contender as a young, somewhat controllable first baseman, and you can get something good for him, I'd get him in a second and bring Rhys Hoskins up here and let him play first base. I don't see that Phillies will be losing anything, and they might be gaining something. I think Hoskins' overall offensive profile looks a little bit better to me than Tommy Joseph. They're both first basemen. They're both blocked at first base. So something's got to give.
Yeah, and you have Tommy Joseph last year, of course, with 21 home runs, 47 ribbies on a bad Phillies team. But he reminds me a lot of Pat Burrell, like a younger Pat Burrell, 25 years old. As you said, he's still somewhat young. He's going to be 26 in a couple days. But he's a player that's proven himself to be an everyday player at first base in the big leagues. And it's not all the time that the Phillies have that sort of a commodity with those sort of numbers. I mean, if you look at Odubel Herrera's numbers last year, he had 15 home runs and 49 ribbies. And, he got a $32, $35 million contract out of the Phillies. So, two different players, but I hope the Phillies don't make a mistake with gambling on a player like Hoskins, then he comes up and he doesn't pan out. I mean, there's a gamble all the time in Major League Baseball, I guess, with certain players. But, Joseph, he's not a non-touchable guy. And, in fact, Matt Klentak had said that nobody on this team is immune to being traded. So that kind of told you where he was with this team as well.
And they shouldn't be. I mean, who can you look at on this Phillies team that is, before their win today, was 30 games under 500? And who can you look at on a team that's 30 games below 500 and say they're untouchable? I mean, there isn't anybody. I've seen a lot of positive press lately for Freddie Galvis. There's no way that Freddie Galvis is untouchable. He's a nice little player, but I think here's another guy who could possibly help a contender. The thing you have to look at when you're evaluating Freddie Galvis, he makes some great defensive plays. He's a hustler. All these things are great about Galvis. The but is the Phillies aren't going to be good next year. They're not going to win going for the playoffs next year. It just doesn't happen. There's going to be some transition from a 30 games below 500 team before they win. So the first goal has got to be get competitive, get to that 500 level, and then I think we're looking at, hopefully that's next year, and then you're looking at 2019 before you start maybe pushing to win. Well, Freddie Galvis is going to turn 28 years old in November this year. By the time we're talking about maybe winning, he's pushing 30 years old. So Freddie Galvis isn't some 24-year-old kid, who's going to be part of the future. That's the way you have to look at these things. If the Phillies were a winner right now, you could probably, with the right players around them, you could win with Freddie Galvis, but they're not. And the key is, who do you have? And we thought we had the guy in J.P. Crawford. He had a real bad, horrible, start to the season, but he's picking it up lately. He's got himself across the Mendoza line, and his average has been steadily rising down there at the Iron Pig. So the Phillies really have to be hoping that Crawford has a big second half in him here, and that they actually have that long-term option. Because I don't think Galvis is a long-term. He's no long-term option for me. I'm fine if he stays around. He plays shortstop for another year, but I think they're kidding anybody who's writing. I've seen positive pieces written about him, and they should be. He's a hustler. He's a good defensive player, but I don't see him as a cornerstone for this rebuilding program. So I don't make him untouchable. So who is untouchable? Aaron Altair. How hot was Alan Altair for the first month and a half of the season? Do people still talk about Aaron Altair? And if they do they realize that over his last 200 plate appearances, that's 50 games. That's nothing to sneeze at. I'm talking about better than a month and a half, 50 games to 200 plate appearances. He's hitting .249 with a .305 on base percentage and just 5 home runs. So Altair has, I don't know if you can say he's collapsed, but he's nowhere near the torrid start that he was off to. So maybe we need to check ourselves if we want to say that Aaron Altair is untouchable. I've heard that out there. So I don't think there's any untouchable on this current Phillies team right now.
And there's where I think
maybe like somebody like Nola, maybe a couple of younger pitchers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the Phillies and the Mets should entertain some sort of deal. I'm sure the Mets would like to pick up somebody off the Phillies team, and we need a quality starter like the Dark Knight or somebody.
He's had his injury troubles, and does he really fit what we're trying to do with his age and his injury situation? You know what I'm saying? I think that they're going to have to. I don't think that. I've seen the discussion with Nola, like what is his upside, and same with some of the other young pitchers that they have, and I don't necessarily see an ace in this group. I think Nola has the potential to maybe be a 2. He's definitely a 3 already. I think he's a 3. So if we say that Nola's a 3 going forward, which is nothing at all to sneeze at, that's a fantastic pitcher. That's a guy every starting rotation has to have. If he's that number 3 caliber pitcher, they're going to have to at some point trade for or pay for an ace or 2. But you can't do that until you're ready to win. They have to start getting some of these younger position players up, like they're doing now with Nick Williams. Finally, they have to start getting some of them into the mix. The second half of the season has to be about keeping some of these young arms healthy and move Hellickson and get Velasquez back healthy, find out what he is. Is he really a starter going forward? Is he going to be your closer? You have to answer some of these pitching questions, and you have to start breaking in some more position players besides Williams. I'd like to see Hoskins up here. Maybe you can deal with Joseph. Maybe another outfielder if Quinn can get healthy. Maybe we can get him up here. But the transition has to start, at some point, because otherwise you're going to be sinking 40 and 50 games below 500.
Yeah, that's amazing. Matt Klentak has his work cut out for him. As we said all along in the last few podcasts, it could be Pete Mackanin getting replaced. That could be the spark plug. Maybe some of these guys are too young. The generational differences are so great between a guy like Mackanin, who's been in the game for 50 years, and you got a 25-year-old that doesn't quite see the game from his level. So it'll be interesting to see what the Phillies end up doing in the second half, as you said. And going into the All-Star break here, a little All-Star game history from Philadelphia. The game was held in Philly 4 times, twice at Shibe Park, once in 1943, then again in 1952 at Shibe Park, and then twice at Veterans Stadium. 1976 was the bicentennial year, and then 20 years later, 1996. So we're about due for an All-Star game to stop in the city of Philadelphia, don't you think, Matt?
Yeah, I remember, unfortunately old enough to remember both of those Veterans Stadium All-Star games. And I was a 14-year-old kid when the bicentennial came along. And I remember it being a big event. It was part of 8 million big events that were going on that year in Philly. We had the president here throw out the first pitch. The Phillies were just starting to get good. That would be the first year of 3 straight years that they would win the division. They had, I'm looking down the National League roster right now, the Phillies had Luzinski was the only starter And they had a bunch of reserve players, though. Bob Boone, Dave Cash, Schmidt, Boa. They had a bunch of Danny Ozark was on the coaching staff. So Phillies were well represented at that All-Star game. The 96 game, I actually was working, and I got to attend the All-Star Fan Fest on a work assignment. So I got to get the flavor of what that was all about. But you're right, we're due. From what I understand, Philadelphia is intentionally waiting. We're waiting for, I wish I could remember now. It's something in the early part of next decade that is it's the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. I don't know what they call that, not the bi or tricentennial, but something in between there. Mm-hmm. That supposedly comes up in 2026. So now, if that's the case, which is what I've heard, then you're talking about still another 9 years, before we'll have an All-Star game at Citizens Bank Park. The game would probably be awarded to us maybe 5 or 6 years from now. So that's my understanding, is that that's what they're waiting for, but who knows? We are due.
Yeah, we're overdue by that time. God, they'll be ready to close Citizens Bank Park. They'll be thinking about a new stadium.
The vet got, for what was the argument about the vet was, geez, for as solid a facility as it was, I mean, it got a bad rep at the end, but it was that it only lasted 30-some years. You would have thought you would have gotten more time out of that facility. I think that when they opened it in 1971, they would have thought that it was going to be here for a while, especially when you compare it to how long other athletic facilities had lasted to that point. So 30-some years isn't long, but in those 30-some years, they got 2 All-Star games. I mean, we had 2 within 20 years, one in 76, one in 96. So our waiting now is, if we wait 30 years from 96 to 2026, it really, if you think about it, it's right. It's actually right, because there are 30 major league teams. So if everybody gets a turn, then the Phillies don't get another turn coming to them until 2026.
We'll have to keep our eye on that. Hopefully it'll be sooner than that. You and I will both be a little bit older, and
I'm planning on being around, Rich. So
certainly probably wiser. So, but I hope it's sooner than that. But if it has to be, it has to be. But closing out the podcast, we're going to talk a little bit about Pete Rose, and of course, next month in August, they're going to be honoring Pete Rose in Philadelphia. And last month, we saw Rose get honored in Cincinnati again with a big statue with a headfirst slide in Cincinnati. It was an awesome-looking statue that they unveiled there in Cincinnati. The trademark reckless slide there from Pete Rose, headfirst. And we're looking forward to this game, aren't we, Matt?
Yeah, my wife and I will be heading out to that game. Pete was, 1979 when he signed. I was 17 years old when Pete came in, and I remember really well because the Phillies had, during my teenage years, they had won 3 straight division titles, but they just couldn't win in the playoffs. And it just seemed obvious. It was very obvious the talent was there. They just were missing something. And whether it was in retrospect or at the time, and that team, people like Schmidt, people like Tug McGraw, I've heard them speak over the years. They've said, they realized what they were missing. And I think when Rose came, he was the perfect player. I mean, this was a guy who was Charlie Hustle. He was going to light a fire. Veteran player, had won already, had won MVPs, had won All-Stars, had been, part of multiple world championship teams with the Big Red Machine. I mean, he was the perfect fit for the Phillies. And it didn't start out great. I don't know how many people, everybody remembers winning the World Series, and, Rose was so popular here for 5 years. But that first season, the Phillies finished in 4th place. There were a lot of expectations. They were in first, as I remember. It all started great, and they were in first, I think, until the middle to the end of May, maybe. And then just injury after injury started hitting them, and other teams got hot. The Pirates had that We Are Family team that year, and the Cardinals were good, and the Expos were starting to have their young nucleus with Carter and Dawson and those guys, Raines. And the Phillies finished in 4th in Pete Rose's first year. And it took to that second year before they finally won the World Series in 1980.
Yeah, it was quite a time to be around Philadelphia. And, of course, Rose was quite the extravagant type of guy, rolling around in a Rolls Royce, I believe I read. I was a younger guy at the time, and I didn't catch those stories. But, yeah, he was definitely one of those guys that you would probably see a movie about in 20 years from now, these classic baseball heroes, the way he carried himself. And to a certain extent, he knew he was good as well. He wasn't shy to tell you, hey, I'm it. I'm the hit king.
Well, what do we think now? Like a guy gets to be... And it's legit. A guy gets to be in his low 30s now, and you start thinking, what's the exit game? Maybe if a guy is still performing at a high level in his mid 30s, that is a major bonus. You start getting to the upper 30s, and it's end of the road time for almost everybody. Pete Rose was 38 years old when he came to the Phillies. You know what I mean? 38 years old, and then as a Philly. So after that, he was an All-Star 4 times. He won a Silver Slugger Award. He led the league in doubles. He led the league in runs scored. I mean, he led the league in on-base percentage. This is like in his time with the Phillies after he was already turning 38 years old. So, I mean, Pete Rose was one of the best baseball players in the history of the game. He's no doubt about it, first ballot Hall of Famer. All the other nonsense aside, the man deserves to be in the Hall of Fame, enshrined as a Hall of Famer. You can talk about, as part of that, you can talk about all the controversy that surrounded him, but it's ridiculous to have something called the Hall of Fame without Pete Rose in it.
Yeah, and I had even talked to Gary Matthews a few years ago about the story of the 1983 team, and of course a lot of people don't remember that the Phillies made the World Series that year as well. Pete Rose was a member of that team, along with Matthews, Maddox, Joe Morgan at second for 123 games. And, what a shame. They did not win the World Series in 1983. You don't really hear too much about that season, but that was a magical season for the Phillies as well. As you said, Pete Rose at that time, he was 42 years old and still playing at a high level. So, Schmitty as well. I mean, Schmitty put in 154 games in 1983, and you never hear anybody talk about that. It's almost like the year that Phillies fans forgot because we got into the World Series, but we didn't win.
Yeah, it was a very, as the nickname was, the Wheeze Kids. I mean, it was a very veteran team. They brought in Tony Perez and Joe Morgan, kind of a little Big Red Machine reunion there with Rose. And I think, if my memory serves me correctly, Rose and Perez did a lot of splitting of first base. Rose, at that point, like you said, he was 42. His game did decline a little bit that season. And I think it's the only year he didn't make the All-Star team with the Phillies. But that was a crazy team in that they fired their manager roughly halfway through the season. The Pope takes over, comes down from the general manager seat and takes over as the manager. So they not only do they have an old team, but now they got an old manager. And you would think that this is the kind of team that at their age, would just crumble at the end, and the young legs would kick in at the end. But the Phillies won it at the end. They got scorching hot over like the last 3 weeks of the season. I think it was, I don't know, we could look it up. It was some ridiculous record over the last three weeks of the season. Maybe something like 17 out of 20 or something. They went on a major winning streak and just kind of pulled away with the division that had been tight up to that point. And they rode that through, winning the NLCS and even won the first game of the World Series against the Orioles. And it kind of looked like, geez, man, these old guys are going to do it. But then, it all came. The real collapse in the World Series wasn't so much a collapse, but The Orioles pitching was just fantastic in that World Series.
Yes, it was. Jim Palmer, I believe, was still on that club, and yeah, they were overpowered. As you said, they might not have deserved to be there. They were 43 and 42 before Pat Corrales was fired, a 500 team. But under Owens, they went 47 and 30. So
yeah, and I think if you look at that, if I could get it somewhere here, that 47 and 30, 17 games over 500. But I'll bet you like 15 of that 17 over 500 happened in like the last 3 weeks of the season. It was a crazy ending to that season.
Yeah, almost like 2007 when the Phillies run the table on the Mets and came back. I think they were 10 or 11, 12 games back with 6 weeks to go in the season, something like that, were the Phillies in 2007, and they caught the Mets at the wire. Well, a lot of great memories there. The All-Star Game break coming up very fast. It's going to be an enjoyable game this year. And Matt, why don't you let the listeners know where they can find you out on the internet?
Probably the two easiest places to find me, Rich, are at all my work I put on my website, which is mattveasey.com. So it's spelled the way my name is, MattVeasey.com. And I'm also on Twitter with my full name, Matthew Veasey. So it's at Matthew, Matthew, Veasey, Veasey. Those are the two best places. I've also been running something at Facebook now. So if anybody out there is on Facebook, they can look up the page called Ashburn Alley. And I've been trying to put as much Phillies related, not just my own stuff, but anything that is published out there about the team. I've been trying to keep it as like a news amalgamation, news home dumping site for anything that's going on with the Phillies on Facebook. So Ashburn Alley on Facebook, that page, and then my site. And I'm still waiting for Fansided. It's might be a little bit tougher to find it there, but if they look up on Fansided, I would recommend everybody follow Fansided MLB on Twitter, and you'll get a lot more than my work, but there's a lot of good Major League Baseball stuff at Fansided MLB.
Very good. Look forward to all your work in the second half. And, of course, we invite you back all through the season, talking more about the Phillies. Hopefully the Phillies will have a better second half. I know they need major changes. We'll see what happens towards the end of the month with the trade deadline as well. And what can we say? We're just going to have to hang in there as Phillies fans. We're not going anywhere, but we're just going to have to sit tight, so to speak.
Can it get any worse, Rich?
We're trying.
It can't get any worse, right?
It can't get any worse. That's right. We've thrown in the towel on that.
Better.
We've been to the bottom floor already.
Yes.
Well, thanks very much for joining us on Phillies Talk Podcast. Have a great All-Star game, everyone. We'll talk to you on the other side of it.